It started on a humid Tuesday morning when I got a frantic call from my grandma. Her voice trembled with a mixture of fear and fury. Something I'd only heard once before when someone had stolen her prized peach cobbler recipe from the county fair. But this wasn't about pie. This was serious. She said they had put spike strips outside her cottages, actual tire shrouding, police-grade spike strips. The kind used in high-speed chases, not meant for the dusty driveway of a woman's peaceful home. She said she couldn't leave. Her car was boxed in, and the few feet around her porch were littered with jagged strips of steel. I thought it was some prank, but when I drove over, I saw it with my own eyes. My stomach turned. The HOA had finally gone too far. Now, let me explain. Grandma lived in one of those neighborhoods with a strict homeowners association. The kind that fines you if your grass is half an inch too tall, or if your flower pots don't match the seasonal palette. But Grandma always kept to herself. She paid her dues, tended her roses, and made the best sweet tea on the block. The HOA had never liked her though. Probably because she didn't attend their meetings or decorate with their approved holiday lights, but spike strips. This was criminal. When I approached her house that day, I noticed a laminated notice taped to her front door. It read, "Due to multiple violations and unauthorized guests, this property is considered a disturbance. Emergency containment measures have been enacted." Containment, like she was a biohazard. I ripped the paper off and stormed inside. She was sitting calmly at her kitchen table, sipping sweet tea, documents spread around her like armor. She looked up and smiled. Not a warm smile, more like the kind of smile a lion gives right before it pounces. "They've made a mistake," she said. I asked her what had happened. She said it started a week ago. A new HOA president, Lance Braddock, had taken office. Young guy, maybe late 30s. Slick hair, mirrored sunglasses, and an attitude that screamed small-town dictator. Apparently, Lance had passed some new ordinance that limited driveway usage to registered household members only. Grandma's friend, Miss Eliza, had come by with groceries and parked for 10 minutes, saying that was enough for a violation. Then came the warnings, followed by fines. Grandma contested them. That's when things escalated. The spike strips were just the HOA's way of showing who was in charge. Or so they thought. What Lance didn't know, what none of the board members knew, was that my grandma wasn't just a sweet old lady with a killer peach cobbler. She was also the state prosecutor. Retired, yes, but with enough legal weight to bury people in paperwork until their great-grandchildren. Needed lawyers. And Grandma had receipts. She had saved every letter, photographed every posted notice, and even recorded conversations with HOA reps on her old-school tape recorder. She had built a case, a big one. By the time I arrived, she had already faxed documents to the county legal office. She was preparing to go nuclear, and I was ready to help. That afternoon, I helped her file formal complaints with the city inspector and the state attorney general. We made copies, mailed letters, and emailed files. She even scheduled interviews with local news outlets. The next morning, a city inspector showed up, saw the spike strips, and his jaw dropped. "This is not legal," he muttered. He took photos, wrote up a report, and said the HOA would be hearing from multiple departments. Within hours, word had spread. News vans began showing up. Reporters knocked on Grandma's door. She answered each question with poise and precision, not revealing too much, just enough to stir curiosity. The headline the next day read, "Spike strips at Sweet Tea Cottage. State prosecutor fights back." Lance Braddock tried to hold a press conference. Bad idea. Every question was about the spike strips and whether he had authority to use them. He squirmed, stuttered, and finally stormed off. His polished image was cracking. Meanwhile, Grandma didn't stop. She dug deeper, pulling records on every fine the HOA had issued in the past 6 months. Turns out, many of them were illegitimate. She discovered that Lance had been inflating fees and rerouting funds into a maintenance reserve account that nobody had voted on. She found missing funds, unapproved contracts, and fake vendor invoices. It became clear that Lance wasn't just a petty tyrant. He was corrupt, and Grandma was going to expose him. She drafted a motion to remove him and called for an emergency HOA vote. The bylaws allowed it, and she had the signatures. The day of the vote, the community center was packed. Seniors and lawn chairs, young couples, folks who had never shown up before, they all came. Lance tried to defend himself, but every time he opened his mouth, someone shouted another accusation. Grandma stood quietly, letting the people speak. Then she dropped the bomb. She showed them the audit she had prepared, line by line, explaining where every dollar had gone. The crowd erupted. People were furious. The vote was held by secret ballot. Lance was removed by a landslide, but it didn't end there. The state attorney general picked up the case. Lance was charged with fraud, misuse of funds, and unlawful detainment. The spike strips alone earned him a hefty civil suit. Grandma didn't ask for money, she asked for reform. A new board was elected, with community transparency as its first goal. In the weeks that followed, Grandma became a local hero. People stopped by with flowers, baked goods, and thank you cards. The news dubbed her the Sweet Tea Prosecutor. And even though she insisted she was retired, her actions had reminded everyone that justice didn't retire. Not when it mattered. One afternoon, as we sat on her now spike-free porch, sipping tea, I asked her if she was glad it was over. She smiled that lion smile again. "Oh, it's not over," she said. "It's just getting interesting." And I believed her. The day after the emergency vote, Grandma's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Messages poured in from neighbors, community groups, and even attorneys offering to help with the HOA overhaul. Some were just curious. Others were downright inspired. They wanted to know how she did it. How a quiet woman with silver hair and a southern accent took down an entire crooked board with nothing more than documentation, determination, and an iron will. But Grandma wasn't interested in fame. She was interested in fixing the rot. She called a meeting in her living room the next day. No podiums, no microphones, just folding chairs and legal pads. 15 people showed up, including a couple of folks who had never even spoken to her. Before she offered them lemonade and cookies, then handed out copies of the HOA bylaws. "We start with education," she said. "You can't change what you don't understand." That night, they tore through the bylaws like detectives at a crime scene. Grandma pointed out clauses most had never noticed before, rules that protected residents more than the HOA ever let on. They mapped out a plan. Transparency measures, budget audits, fair hearing policies, regular town halls. No more secrecy. No more abuse of power. Within a week, flyers went up across the neighborhood. New HOA, new start. Come be heard. The first community-wide meeting under the new board drew twice as many people as any meeting in the HOA's history. Folks were tired of being ignored, fined, and controlled. They came with stories about broken sidewalks that never got repaired, about arbitrary fines for garden gnomes or bird feeders, about fear. Grandma stood at the front of the room not as a leader, but as a neighbor. She listened to every concern, took notes, and made sure every voice was heard. She didn't want to run the HOA. She wanted to make sure no one else would abuse it again. Meanwhile, the legal case against Lance Braddock moved forward. Evidence collected by Grandma became the backbone of the prosecution. News coverage intensified. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, hungry for updates. Lance's attorney tried to spin a narrative that it was all a misunderstanding, that Lance had only done what he thought was right. But the bank records, the fake vendors, and the spike strips said otherwise. The trial date was set, and subpoenas went out. Grandma was asked to testify. She agreed, but not before insisting the court hear from others affected by Lance's rule. She wanted the judge to see the community, not just the numbers. Her testimony was powerful. She recounted events with clarity and conviction, never once raising her voice, but making every word count. When asked why she had pursued the case so aggressively, she said, "Because when people stop believing in fairness, the whole system crumbles. And I've spent my life making sure that never happens. Not in my state, not on my street." By the time the trial concluded, Lance was found guilty on multiple counts: fraud, misuse of authority, and unlawful detainment. He was sentenced to prison and ordered to pay restitution. Grandma didn't show up to the sentencing. She was too busy helping a neighbor draft an appeal for a wrongly issued fence violation from 3 years prior. As the weeks passed, the neighborhood changed, slowly at first, but undeniably. People started talking more, helping more. Kids played freely on the sidewalks. Gardens bloomed again, wild, colorful, unapologetic. Gone were the beige restrictions of the past. Mailboxes were painted. Flags flew for holidays of all kinds. It wasn't chaos, it was community. One morning, Grandma called me over. She had something to show me. I arrived to find her porch freshly painted. The rocking chairs recushioned. She held out a thick binder. Its cover labeled, "Neighborhood Justice Manual." "What's this?" I asked. "A guide," she said, "for anyone who finds themselves on the wrong side of a power-hungry HOA, or any small-minded official who forgets who they serve." Inside were templates for complaints, examples of misleading fines, instructions on how to collect evidence, and contact lists for every agency that could intervene. It was brilliant. It was practical. It was pure Grandma. She didn't want revenge. She wanted change, and she got it. But she wasn't done. Not by a long shot. That fall, she was invited to speak at a statewide conference for homeowners' rights. She hesitated, saying she was too old for podiums. But eventually, she agreed. She stood on that stage with her cane in one hand and a binder in the other. Her speech went viral. Millions watched as she calmly dismantled the myth that seniors were powerless. "You think I'm just someone's grandmother," she said, "but I'm also someone's prosecutor, someone's neighbor, someone's voice, and I'll keep speaking until they listen." After that, requests came in from other states. Could she help other neighborhoods? Could she teach? Could she lead a movement? She declined every leadership offer but sent out copies of her binder, now dubbed the Porch Power Playbook. It was downloaded thousands of times. Forums popped up. A Facebook group was created called Not on My Porch. Grandma logged, and occasionally to offer advice. She was direct, helpful, and didn't tolerate nonsense. Read your bylaws, she often typed. Document everything. Speak calm. Fight smart. And people listened. Back at home, the neighborhood flourished. Grandma's front yard became a symbol of resilience. People came by just to see the spike strip-free driveway and the woman who changed it all. She never bragged. She just poured them sweet tea and asked how their day was. Then one day, a letter arrived from the governor, commending her for her service to the community and offering her a formal title, Senior Community Advisor to the State Housing Council. I asked her if she'd accept. She said, only if I can do it from my porch. And they agreed. That's how my grandmother, the same one who once chased a squirrel out of her garden with a broom, became one of the most respected voices in housing reform. Because sometimes, it only takes one person to stand up and say, enough. And when that person happens to be a retired prosecutor with a sweet smile and a spine of steel, well, good luck standing in her way. Winter arrived earlier than expected that year, frosting the rooftops in the neighborhood and casting long shadows across Grandma's garden. The same garden she'd once been warned about for having too many unregulated bird feeders. Now it stood as a proud little sanctuary, decorated with handmade wooden signs from local kids and fairy lights strung along the fence. Grandma's story had reached farther than we thought possible. Local newspapers started calling her the legal lioness of Laurel Grove. The HOA community board had a new face, and the entire neighborhood ran on trust, cooperation, and transparency. But with change comes resistance, and not everyone was happy. A small group of former board loyalists, those who had benefited from Lance Braddock's policies, started stirring the pot. They claimed Grandma's changes were destabilizing and that she was becoming too influential. Some accused her of turning the HOA into a publicity machine. One even tried to file a motion to revoke her honorary advisory position. Grandma wasn't fazed. She laughed when she heard about the motion. They think positions are power. I've got something stronger people who believe in me. Still, she didn't ignore the tension. She knew how easily change could be reversed if you weren't vigilant. She called another neighborhood meeting, this time at the community park pavilion. It was cold, but dozens still came, bundled in coats and scarves. Grandma brought hot cocoa and handouts. She reassured everyone that the HOA wasn't about her, it was about all of them. I'm just an old woman who doesn't like bullies, she said, her voice carried by the breeze. But if you want this neighborhood to stay free and fair, you've got to show up, vote, speak up, watch the budget. Don't let comfort make you lazy. The crowd cheered. Even the skeptics couldn't argue with that. In the months that followed, a shift occurred. More neighbors volunteered for committees. Block parties were organized. Even a community book club started meeting twice a month in Grandma's living room. The HOA turned from a watchdog into a real support system. Home maintenance projects were handled fairly. Budgets were posted publicly. No more mystery fines. But the most touching change came when Grandma helped organize a neighborhood mentorship program. Young adults in the area, many of whom had never felt seen by the old HOA regime, were now learning leadership, finance, and civics from the very residents who had once been too afraid to put a gnome on their lawn. One mentee, 15-year-old Maya, had dreams of becoming a lawyer. Grandma took her under her wing, teaching her how to read contracts, analyze ordinances, and even write letters to city council. Maya became a star in the neighborhood, confident, curious, and sharp-tongued, just like her mentor. Things were good, but peace never lasts forever. One evening, a letter arrived from a newly formed regional HOA oversight committee. It claimed authority over all community boards in the county and requested access to Laurel Grove's meeting minutes, budgets, and member lists. It smelled fishy, too polished, too sudden. Grandma read it 3 times, then picked up her phone and called the State Housing Department. After an hour, on hold, she spoke to someone who confirmed what she feared. This new committee wasn't formed by the state. It was a private company backed by former HOA contractors trying to regain control through legal loopholes. The very people she'd unseated were trying to create a backdoor, but Grandma didn't panic. She called Maya and a few others, and they began drafting a legal response. This time, it wasn't just about rules and meetings. This was about sovereignty, about a neighborhood's right to govern itself. Within days, they submitted their challenge, citing over a dozen state laws protecting independent HOAs. But they didn't stop there. Grandma reached out to every neighborhood in the county. She organized a virtual town hall, hosted from her porch, attended by over 200 residents from 16 communities. They shared their stories, their fears, their hopes, and they united. A petition was started to demand state review of the oversight committee's legitimacy. Local news caught wind, and soon the state legislature was involved. What began as a quiet fight over spike strips had turned into a grassroots campaign for homeowner autonomy across the region. Through it all, Grandma remained steady. She reminded everyone that the key wasn't to shout louder, it was to outsmart outwork, and outlast. And that's exactly what they did. By spring, the oversight committee was shut down. Its backers faced fines and were barred from operating in housing matters for 5 years. It was another victory, but Grandma didn't celebrate. There's always another storm, she said. That's why we build strong roofs, not just pretty ones. As she said this, she handed me a new binder. This one was labeled Community Defense Toolkit. Inside were updated forms, legal precedents, sample bylaws, and a list of trusted attorneys willing to advise communities under threat. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud, but it was powerful. She smiled and poured me a cup of tea. The same way she had the first day I saw those spike strips outside her door. I told you, she said. It was just getting interesting. And it still was. The warm breeze of summer returned to Laurel Grove, carrying with it the scent of honeysuckle and the sound of children riding their bikes down the now spike-free streets. Grandma's porch was rarely empty these days. People came not just for advice, but for reassurance that someone still cared. Someone still watched over the community. Even when the threats wore suits and carried fine print instead of chains and steel, Maya was now preparing to apply for law school, and every evening she and Grandma sat by the fire pit reviewing cases and legal principles. Grandma called it porch prep. Maya called it better than any class she'd ever had. More teens began joining in, turning the old backyard into something of a grassroots civics classroom. They called themselves the Laurel Legal League, jokingly at first, but the name stuck. Even the mayor had taken notice. He invited Grandma to a special city council session to receive a public service award. She declined the spotlight but allowed the youth mentorship team to attend and speak. Maya delivered a speech that brought everyone to their feet. She said, "Justice doesn't retire. It just needs a place to sit down and be heard." But while the community thrived, an anonymous letter arrived at Grandma's door. No return address, no signature, just a warning. You've made powerful people uncomfortable. Be careful. We thought it was a prank until a week later, when a code enforcement officer showed up at Grandma's house with a citation for unauthorized structural additions. The additions, the birdhouses in her front yard, and the new bench donated by a local carpenter. It was clear someone was trying to silence her again, this time through obscure codes and petty enforcement. Grandma didn't even blink. She took the citation, framed it, and hung it in her hallway beside her state prosecutor's certificate. But she knew things were shifting again. Calls started coming in from other neighborhoods. One group in another county had received threats after challenging their HOA's election results. Another group had been fined thousands for unapproved paint colors. These weren't isolated incidents. This was a pattern. So Grandma proposed something new, a statewide coalition, a council of neighborhoods. Using her connections, she began forming the Homeowner Rights Coalition, a voluntary alliance of community leaders, legal experts, and everyday residents committed to protecting autonomy, transparency, and fairness in housing communities. Within 3 months, 74 neighborhoods joined. Monthly meetings were held over Zoom, and quarterly newsletters were distributed with legal updates, training resources, and featured community success stories. Grandma's story, what started as a single act of defiance against spike strips, was now inspiring an entire network of empowered citizens, and she was just getting started. That winter, the coalition filed its first amicus brief supporting a community in the state capitol fighting back against illegal development plans pushed by a corporate-backed HOA. Grandma helped draft it herself, sipping coffee by her fireplace as snow fell outside. When the ruling came in their favor, there was no press conference, no media blitz, just a quiet phone call from a grateful family who said, "We felt powerless. But you made us believe we weren't alone." That meant more to Grandma than any award. Meanwhile, back in Laurel Grove, the neighborhood was planning its annual summer fair. It had become a beloved tradition now, free of arbitrary permits and HOA interference. Food stalls, music, craft booths. It was everything a community should be. This year, they renamed it the Margaret Monroe Festival. Grandma protested at first. She didn't want her name on anything. But when she saw the banner, the kids wearing t-shirts that read, "Ask Margaret," and the speech Maya gave in her honor, she smiled. A real, soft, humble smile. She stood on the stage and said, "I didn't do this alone. I just reminded you how powerful you've always been." As twilight settled, and the lights of the fair flickered to life, I stood next to her on that stage. I remembered the day she called me, panicked about spike strips and HOA notices. I remembered how angry I felt, how helpless. But now, looking out at the joy, the unity, the color, and laughter, I realized she had never been helpless. She had just been underestimated. Because sometimes, the most dangerous person to a corrupt system isn't loud or flashy. It's a grandmother with a binder, a backbone, and a porch full of people who believe in her. And when systems forget who they serve, she reminds them one letter, one case, one neighborhood at a time. That's how you change the world. From the front porch Summer gave way to a crisp autumn, the leaves in Laurel Grove turning brilliant shades of gold and red. Despite the seasonal change, the warmth of community spirit never faded. Grandma's porch had become something of a civic hub. Locals dropped by to ask questions, offer ideas, or just bring pie. Even those who once doubted her had become allies, but change, especially the kind that upsets long-standing structures, often creates ripples beyond the neighborhood. News of the Homeowner Rights Coalition had reached national outlets. A feature story ran on a popular Sunday morning news program. Cameras filmed Grandma surrounded by youth leaders, answering questions with her usual calm confidence. It wasn't about celebrity, it was about reach. And now, the reach was growing. Soon, letters began arriving from out of state. One came from a community in Oregon that was being threatened with eviction over arbitrary HOA rules about solar panels. Another, from a retired teacher in Texas, fined for her porch swing facing the wrong direction. And a particularly urgent one from a widow in Georgia whose home was seized over unpaid HOA fees she hadn't known existed. Grandma read each one. She couldn't respond to all of them herself, but she made sure someone from the coalition did. She'd built a small team, young professionals, retired lawyers, passionate volunteers who began organizing workshops, webinars, and resource guides. It was no longer just about Laurel Grove. It was about principle. One afternoon, as we were organizing mail, Grandma turned to me with a different sort of seriousness in her eyes. "We've come far," she said, "but we need a legacy, something that lasts longer than any of us." That's when she shared her idea for the Porch Justice Foundation. It would be a nonprofit dedicated to educating homeowners, protecting housing rights, and advocating for legislative reform. The coalition would continue as the grassroots arm, but the foundation would take the fight to state houses, law schools, and public forums. I asked her who would run it. She looked at me and said, "You will." At first, I laughed, but she wasn't joking. "You've been beside me since day one. You've seen what works, what doesn't. You know the heart of this." It was a humbling moment, one I didn't take lightly. Within weeks, we filed the paperwork, secured a board of advisors, and launched the website. Donations came in from people across the country, some small, some large, all heartfelt. The first campaign focused on rewriting outdated HOA laws in 3 states. Grandma worked closely with local legislators, offering testimony, evidence, and solutions. Meanwhile, Maya had started her first semester at law school. She sent updates weekly, often asking Grandma for clarification on tricky legal theories. Professor Monroe had a nice ring to it. We all agreed. Then, just as things seemed to be settling into a rhythm, we received a visit from a representative of a national HOA lobbying group. He was polite, well-dressed, and clearly nervous. He said they wanted to open a dialogue about working together. Grandma narrowed her eyes. "You mean you want to water down our efforts before they cost you money?" The man chuckled awkwardly. "Not at all. We just think compromise is important." "Compromise," Grandma said, "is fine when both parties are equals. But when one has power and the other has none, compromise is often just surrender with manners." She thanked him for his time and showed him to the door. After he left, we sat in silence. Then she smiled. "We're getting to them. That's how you know you're making progress." The next few months were a blur of travel, speaking engagements, legal filings, and media interviews. Grandma turned down every offer to be on reality TV or have a book ghosted, and she said, "This isn't entertainment. This is real life." But she did allow one thing: a children's book based on her story, written by a local teacher and illustrated by a neighbor's daughter. It was titled Margaret's Porch, Where Fairness Lives. The first printing sold out in a week. She never stopped, even on days she felt tired. She'd prop her feet up, drink her tea, and edit policy drafts with a red pen sharper than any sword. Then, one late November evening, we gathered around for Thanksgiving dinner. It wasn't just family anymore. It was the coalition team, community members, Maya, and even neighbors from distant counties. The table stretched across the living room and onto the porch. Grandma stood to make a toast. They tried to shut me up with silence, with fear, with traps in the driveway. But they forgot one thing. I've spent a lifetime fighting for what's right, and now, I've got all of you to do it with me. So, let's give thanks. For freedom, for neighbors, and for the kind of justice that starts with one voice and grows into a chorus. The room erupted in cheers. Glasses clinked, kids laughed, and for a moment, there was nothing but warmth. The spike strips were gone. With their memory, the fight they sparked had become something greater than any of us had ever imagined.